Okay, we are now live. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nipa. I work for Housing Court Answers, and today we are here with the Legal Aid Society team. We are here with Susan Bond, Charles McCracken, and Labani Rahman. Today we are discussing CityFHEPS and the community eligibility for those not in shelter, essentially. We will be taking questions throughout the training. You can post them in the chat and they will be answered. We will have a short break and the slides will be posted on our website after the training. Thank you to the Legal Aid Society team for doing this. And now I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie McCracken. I'm an eviction defense attorney with the Legal Aid Society in Queens. I'm very excited to be talking about with you all about CityFHEPS today. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Mrs. Rahman and Mrs. Bond.
Labani?
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Labani Rahman. I am I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Society. I am currently with the Law Reform Unit. Formerly, I was a housing attorney in the Bronx for many years. Happy to be here. And I'll turn it over to Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Bond. I'm in our Brooklyn office in our Government Benefits Unit. And many moons ago, I started as a housing attorney in our Queens office and then moved to Brooklyn. So I'm going to be answering questions in the chat as the training goes along. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And at the end, hopefully we'll have a few minutes for more questions. And we'll take a 10-minute break.
So we have these objectives for this training. We want everyone here to leave with the knowledge about what CityFHEPS is, know a little bit about the background and history of CityFHEPS, know who is eligible for CityFHEPS, know what the basics of CityFHEPS are, what the max rent is, what a person's portion of their rent could be while receiving CityFHEPS, and also how to apply for CityFHEPS, how to modify CityFHEPS, and how to renew CityFHEPS if someone is a CityFHEPS recipient.
So why learn about CityFHEPS in the community? So we can go to the next slide on that. The basic CityFHEPS in the community will pay is a rental housing voucher for people, for certain New Yorkers in a very limited eligibility criteria. For New Yorkers who qualify, CityFHEPS can help solve common problems faced by tenants in non-payment housing cases. It will help pay the arrears that have already accumulated in a housing court case, and it will pay a portion of the rent going forward, ensuring long-term affordability for that family. Similarly to other subsidies like FHEPS and Section 8, there are various program requirements to become eligible in the first place and then to maintain eligibility and the subsidy going forward. There is a separate program for folks who are already in the shelter to obtain CityFHEPS voucher to move out. It's similar in some structure, but there are some distinctions.
So there are three major ways that HRA helps resolve rental arrears. CityFHEPS is just one of them. The first is a one-shot deal. One-shot deal is one-time assistance to pay the arrears. The recipient must have future ability to pay ongoing rent, and it's a repayable grant. So the recipient is expected to pay HRA the money back. An example from one of my cases, I had a client who was working in the medical field, needed surgery. Because of that, was not able to work for a few months, got behind on the rent. But when she recovered and resumed work, she was able to pay the rent going forward. HRA gave her that repayable grant so that she could pay the arrears and stay in the apartment while paying her rent in the future and paying HRA back for the grant. Then there's FHEPS. This is a program for households that are recipients of cash assistance with minor children in the home. And then there's CityFHEPS to Stay, which is a voucher to pay arrears and assistance with the ongoing rent to everyone in the household who has immigration status. And that's the major subject of this training today.
So we'll start with some background, some vocabulary, the main players, and some history. First off, here is a little bit of word salad for you. Many of you might be familiar with these agencies and these acronyms, and we'll go through them quickly, and then they'll come up throughout the training. HRA, as perhaps you all know, is the New York City Human Resources Administration. Together with another city administration agency, DHS, the Department of Homeless Services. Together, they are known as City DSS, the City Department of Social Services. At the state level, there is the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, that is also referred to as State DSS, and they were the ones who administered the ERAP program, one way that many of you might be familiar with OTDA. Now, under HRA, there are various offices, one of them being the Family Independence Centers. This agency or office oversees the Benefits Access Centers, which is where individuals and households go to apply for various public assistance programs, such as cash assistance, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, SNAP, and Medicaid.
And here's even more anagrams. CityFHEPS, that stands for City Fighting Homelessness and Eviction Prevention Supplement. The RAP unit is the Rental Assistance Program unit, which processes applications for CityFHEPS. There's also RAU, the Rental Assistant unit, which processes one-shot deals. LOSU is the Landlord Ombudsman Service unit, which issues the checks for CityFHEPS once the CityFHEPS application has been approved by RAP. And then there's LINK, Living in Communities Rental Assistance Program. This is a program that was replaced by CityFHEPS. There's also SEPS, the Special Exit and Prevention Supplement, which also no longer exists. Now CityFHEPS and FHEPS exist in their place. There's also CityFHEPS, no H, the City Family Eviction Prevention Supplement, which was replaced by CityFHEPS. And there's also FHEPS, which is the Family Homelessness and Eviction Prevention Supplement, which is processed by FCDU, not RAP. These are very kind of in the weeds, but we hope that with these abbreviations, what we say going forward will make more sense.
And you can refer back to them. You're like, which agency was that? We also wanted to give you a little overview and structure of how the government agencies work with nonprofits, specifically relating to the administration of CityFHEPS in the community. The state agency is OTDA, and it oversees the New York City HRA. The main units of HRA that will come into play here are the Homeless Diversion Unit, and this unit has workers that are located at the Benefit Access Centers. The Rental Assistance Unit that will review rent arrears grant, less important for CityFHEPS, but important to know of the various programs and grants that are available. Again, we have RAP that processes CityFHEPS applications, CRPU that processes mini rent checks, but it's LOSU, the Landlord Ombudsman Unit, that processes CityFHEPS checks. Those are the HRA governmental agencies that work on CityFHEPS. And then on the other side, New York City HRA contracts with a network of nonprofit providers to provide services relating to preventing homelessness. This is the HomeBase network of nonprofits. Only HomeBases are able to process CityFHEPS applications to both move and to stay. Additionally, some legal services organizations like Legal Aid and Legal Services are authorized to submit CityFHEPS applications to stay on behalf of their housing clients.
So before there was CityFHEPS in the community, there was a FHEPS program in the community. And the FHEPS program, which again, Family Homelessness and Eviction Prevention Supplement, was established following a lawsuit called Jiggets v. Dowling. The Jiggets court found that the State Department of Social Security has a duty to establish a shelter allowance schedule reasonably calculated to be adequate. So FHEPS is a rental subsidy that only covers families on cash assistance who have minor children in the household. FHEPS has now been codified in the social services law under 131-BB, and it's governed by the regulations you can find in Section 352.3 of the NYCRR.
So pursuant to litigation, we have various rental subsidies. Those pieces of litigation relate back to these provisions of state law and the state constitution. Most strongly, perhaps, the New York State Constitution in Article 817, I always have a tough time reading those numbers, states that the aid, care, and support of the needy are public concerns and shall be provided by the state. And New York Social Services law states that allowances shall provide for the support, maintenance, and needs of one or both parents if in need and in the home. It is pursuant to these statutes that legal aid and other agencies have been able to bring lawsuits to expand the subsidies and services that New Yorkers have a right to.
So, like I said before, CityFHEPS has replaced a whole plethora of different programs. CityFHEPS is pretty recent. It was established in late 2018 to expand on the limited populations that qualifies for FHEPS. So this is for households who do not have children and might not be on cash assistance. There were several smaller pre-existing programs that were combined and streamlined into CityFHEPS. There is Link 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, CEPS, and CityFHEPS, which was created in 2015. CityFHEPS also replaced the Housing and Urban Development's Tenant-Based Rental Assistance Program, TBRA, in 2023-ish.
Okay, so we will now jump into how CityFHEPS works. But first, there are a number of a slight variety of programs that are encompassed as CityFHEPS. Primarily, there is CityFHEPS A and B. CityFHEPS A is tenant-based rental assistance. CityFHEPS B is project-based rental assistance. Within CityFHEPS A, in the community, so CityFHEPS A in the community is for households facing eviction from current housing. The subsidy can be used to stay in the current home or to move to a new apartment. And as referenced before, applications can be processed. Either application can be processed by HomeBase, and certain legal services providers can process CityFHEPS applications to stay only. There is a subset of CityFHEPS A for residents in shelter and those facing street homelessness. It has slightly different requirements, and those applications are managed by the housing specialist at the shelter. And then CityFHEPS B, which we don't interact with too much, is available as a program through which nonprofits manage buildings pursuant to contracts with the city and provide subsidies for housing, and tenants pay a share tied to their income. The subsidy stays with the building, but in certain instances, HRA can issue a transfer to a household to move from CityFHEPS B into CityFHEPS A in certain circumstances. But primarily, we're talking about CityFHEPS A in the community.
So let me tell you more about the basics of CityFHEPS A. It's a rental subsidy program that pays a portion of rent for qualifying households. Now let's talk about what it means to be a qualifying household. You need to have household income that is under 200% of the federal poverty line. For 2025, that was $64,300 for a family of 4. The family needs to be at risk of eviction or was evicted in the last year, and the household includes someone who has shelter history or an APS referral, along with a few other groups that will be explained more later. At renewal, so once a family has been approved for CityFHEPS or an individual has been approved for CityFHEPS and is renewing their CityFHEPS, the household income can rise higher than 200% of the federal poverty line, but must remain under 80% of the area median income. The maximum rent for units is set by HRA on an annual basis. And like we've said before, CityFHEPS can be used to stay in one's current home or to move to a new home.
Some quick restrictions and details. Somebody who has a Section 8 voucher that's already tied to their income will not also qualify for CityFHEPS except in very few circumstances. Someone who lives in a NYCHA apartment that is also calibrated to their income will not qualify for CityFHEPS. A household that is eligible for FHEPS cannot opt for CityFHEPS. Instead, a household that is receiving the ACS rent subsidy is also not eligible for CityFHEPS. To be eligible for CityFHEPS, the household must have at least one household member who has qualifying immigration status. And for the household to receive CityFHEPS, everyone must have some source of income unless they don't have qualifying, unless they don't have immigration status. So everyone who has the required immigration status must either have cash assistance, other benefit income, or employment income. And everybody who qualifies for cash assistance must apply and be in receipt of cash assistance. And anyone on cash assistance must not have a sanction on their case. It's a lot of stuff.
So let's talk, now that we have a better idea of who is eligible for CityFHEPS and who is not eligible for CityFHEPS, let's talk about what CityFHEPS can look like. It's designed to help a family where the household is facing eviction due to non-payment, but would be able to stay in their current home if they pay the arrears and ongoing rent. And if the household qualifies for CityFHEPS, the program can pay the arrears and then start paying an ongoing monthly subsidy based on the rent and the household income. There are two requirements. The repairs, if the apartment is in need of repairs, repairs must be completed as part of the settlement of the case. And the landlord must give the tenant a lease of at least 1 year from commencement of the subsidy, or the apartment is rent stabilized, unless the apartment is already rent stabilized. When a person has a rent stabilized lease, there is a right to renewal at the end.
CityFHEPS to move is appropriate when the household qualifies for CityFHEPS, but they're not able to stay in their current apartment. Perhaps the lease is expiring, they're not rent stabilized, and the landlord is not willing to give them a new lease. Perhaps they're an occupant who doesn't have a right to a lease and can't assert a right to a lease. Only HomeBase can process a CityFHEPS to move application. And what happens is HomeBase will issue a shopping letter. The household will then go look for an apartment. Once they find an apartment and they are approved for by the landlord, then there are multiple additional steps to finalize the CityFHEPS voucher for the apartment. This includes an inspection, and if there are repairs that come up, they are given an opportunity to make the repairs. It can be a very lengthy process, and that is part of why it is the HomeBases that administer this to ensure proper repairs in good conditions.
So a next question might be, how do we find a HomeBase program? Because HomeBase is such an important part of CityFHEPS to move and CityFHEPS to stay. Well, HomeBase providers are assigned by zip code, and there's a locator on the New York City government website to find the HomeBase location for your client's zip code or for your zip code. You call ahead to make an appointment, and a wait time, unfortunately, can be up to months due to lack of staff. Some home bases take the first 10 walk-ins each day. Others have 6-month wait lists, but are supposed to triage for emergencies. Advocacy may be needed to obtain an expedited appointment due to a court deadline or a need for a shopping letter or to process a new apartment.
Okay, so we'll go a little bit further into the eligibility criteria for who can get CityFHEPS. The household, we've covered this a few times, but repetition is good, right? Household must be at risk of eviction or homelessness and meet one of the following categories. It includes somebody with DHS shelter history. It includes or will be used to preserve a rent-controlled apartment, or someone in the household receives APS services.
So when we talk about at risk of eviction or homelessness, that's a definition that's been put forward in law, and that HRA uses a specific definition. means that within the last 12 months, the household was evicted or lived in a New York City residence that is the subject of an eviction proceeding, is the subject of a rent demand, is the subject of a government vacate order, is the subject of a foreclosure action, or is subject to removal for health and safety reasons as determined by a city agency. So as an eviction defense attorney, most of my clients in a non-pay have already had their first day in court, which means they have received a rent demand. And if they have the other eligibility factors, I might be able to process the CityFHEPS for them. So if you're talking with a client who might be eligible for CityFHEPS, ask them what papers they've received from their landlord, or if they've seen any papers posted on their doors. That could have been a rent demand that could help you with processing their CityFHEPS.
Giselle, your question is well timed. So in assessing whether somebody previously lived in a DHS shelter, HRA has a database. It's the CARES database. Certain agencies, legal aid and legal services, can send a list of applicants to HRA to verify if they have shelter status in the shelter system for which CityFHEPS eligibility is available. HomeBase also has access to that database. And I'm doing these bullets in reverse, I'm sorry. So previously lived in a DHS shelter means if any member of the household has shelter history, then that whole household may qualify for CityFHEPS.
And there's also the rent control department. Rent control department are increasingly uncommon in New York City. They often don't have renewal leases. They may be registered with DHCR or HCR, or have court papers that indicate their rent controlled status.
Another eligibility criteria is someone who is receiving APS services or community guardianship. So APS is Adult Protective Services, and if they find someone, if they refuse someone upon a referral and they find them eligible for services, they will write a letter documenting that they are approving or denying an APS service. Usually the applicant must have no one in the community to help them, and they must be so disabled that they need assistance with the activities of daily living. And if APS does find that someone is eligible for their services and they need CityFHEPS, then APS will submit that application.
There are 3 less common paths to eligibility. The household could be at risk of homelessness and include someone who's served in the U.S. Armed Forces. It could be an individual who has been referred by a CityFHEPS qualifying program, such as Adult and Children's Services, DUICD, Department of Corrections, I believe the DOC is. And the household is currently a recipient of Link 5 or Pathway Home.
Oh my God, I lost my thing. Hold on. I'm sorry. Sorry, one second. I clicked on something.
I see a question from Giselle Gonzalez to clarify they cannot be actively serving. No, if the household includes someone who is actively serving and is at risk of homelessness, they could be CityFHEPS eligible.
And DYCD is the Department of Youth and Community Development.
Thank you. My apologies.
Question about that. So as Charles was saying, so more on eligibility through armed forces services. The household member in the armed services can be currently serving. This includes service in the Federal Reserves, and veterans, including reserve veterans, must show discharge papers, but it need not be honorable discharge.
So what can you get with CityFHEPS? Now that we've determined that a household is eligible, let's see that what are they entitled to as recipients for CityFHEPS. So CityFHEPS doesn't pay any kind of apartment. If you're looking at a $3,000 Manhattan studio, CityFHEPS will probably not cover it. It has a limit, a maximum rent above which people cannot get assistance. So the CityFHEPS payment standard determines the maximum rent for the household based on household size and the number of bedrooms. So generally, a household with income will pay 30% of their income as their share, and HRA will pay the rest. For a household on cash assistance, the rent will be paid by the shelter allowance and CityFHEPS subsidy directly to the landlord. The amount of a CityFHEPS monthly subsidy is based on the number of people in the household, the number of rooms in the apartment, the program rent levels, the household income, and the responsibility of utilities. If our utilities are paid by the landlord, CityFHEPS will pay a higher rent. If no utilities are paid by the landlord, CityFHEPS will only pay a lower rent.
So these are the CityFHEPS levels for 2024, and they have not increased for 2025. They do increase usually, but they did not this year. And this chart is a little bit confusing because I still don't understand what all how those in-between numbers relate. But the important ones here are, if you are a household of 1 or 2, and you are able to rent a 1-bedroom, the maximum rent that you can get, if all utilities are included, is $26.96. If none of the utilities are included, it's $24.84. Those middle 3 columns don't make sense to me. And we'll talk about a little bit further. The rent is determined again by your family size, and your family size will tell you how many bedrooms that CityFHEPS will let you pay for.
So the number of bedrooms, the rent level that a household qualifies for is based on the number of bedrooms they qualify for. The number of bedrooms is based on the number of countable people in the household. Every 2 countable people qualify for an additional bedroom. So 1 or 2 people can rent a 1-bedroom apartment or a studio. 3 to 4 people can rent a 2-bedroom apartment, and it goes on like that. To be considered countable, a person must have qualifying immigration status. So if there are 3 people in a household and only 2 of those people have qualifying immigration status, HRA considers it a 2-person household, and they only qualify for a 1-bedroom apartment or studio. The gender of each household member is not taken into account, but it is in NYCHA Section 8.
Can a household use CityFHEPS in apartments with more or fewer bedrooms than allotted? So if you're a household of 2 that wants to rent an apartment with more bedrooms than allotted, they can do so if the rent is lower than the allotted rent for their household size. So if 2 countable people qualify for a 1-bedroom apartment, the max for which is $26.96. If this household can find a 2-bedroom apartment that is at or under $26.96, they may rent the apartment with their subsidy. Bedrooms below the chart. If the apartment has fewer bedrooms than permitted for the formula, that is okay. The city does not require 1 bedroom for every 2 people. 2 notes here. First, a household cannot pay extra rent on the side, but a household with employment income can be approved for an apartment above the rental standard where their share is no more than 40% of their household income. And another note, and Susan confirmed that this is correct. If a tenant rents an apartment with fewer bedrooms than permitted by the formula, the payment standard will match the number of bedrooms in the unit. For example, a family of 3 that chooses to rent a 1-bedroom apartment will be limited to the payment standard for a 1-bedroom, even though they are 3 people.
All right, Susan.
Yeah.
My
Susan
apologies.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, utility deductions. So these are the confusing numbers that were between all utilities included and no utilities included. Rent levels, as seen in the payment standards chart we showed you, are also adjusted based on who pays the utilities. The maximum rent level permitted for a given household size decreases if the tenant pays for utilities. So let me give an example. You have a household with 4 countable people qualify for a 2-bedroom apartment. Their maximum rent level, if all utilities are included, is $3,027. However, if the tenant pays for gas and electric, the maximum rent is reduced to $2,885. If the tenant pays for electric and the landlord pays for cooking gas, the maximum rent is $2,918. If the tenant pays for gas and the landlord pays for electric, maximum rent is then $2,994. And if the tenant pays for cooking gas, electricity, and gas, heat, and hot water, the max rent is $2,762.
I think these columns make no sense.
Yeah, I have no idea how this is calculated by the city.
With CityFHEPS,
So the city takes this actually from the Section 8 standards.
oh,
So this is set by New York City and a few adjacent counties. And they set it anew generally every January, except for this January. So outside of New York City and a few places in New York City, people may pay for their own heat or hot water, or they might have an electric cooking range versus a gas range. Things are changing in that area. So the second page of the electric we use when somebody doesn't live in a typical rent-stable apartment where heat and hot water are paid for by the landlord. So next slide.
So CityFHEPS will pay utility credits to tenants who pay part or all of their utilities. So for families with employment income, the credit is the amount that was deducted from the maximum rent. So going back to that chart, for a one-bedroom where the tenant pays gas and electric, which is common in New York City, the deduction from the maximum rent is $112. The tenant will be mailed a check for that $112 if they pay the gas and electric. So it evens out that bump in rent that tenants would have if the landlord paid all utilities. Now, for a family on cash assistance, they will get the utility credit amount minus the amount that they receive in utility benefits as part of their cash assistance. So for a family of two, those two little additions to their cash assistance, known as HIA and SHIA, add up to $39.50. So a family on cash assistance will get a check of that utility credit of $112 minus the HIA and SHIA that they get in their cash assistance of $39.50. So they will get a check of $72.50 each month.
The rent, just because an apartment is below the rent level, the maximum rent level for a two-bedroom apartment, doesn't mean that the CityFHEPS will pay for that two-bedroom apartment. The apartment must also pass something called a rent reasonableness test. So the rent reasonable test says that even if the rent for an apartment is within the payment standard, DSS will assess whether the rent requested is reasonable. And they'll base that determination on what type of unit it is, what amenities are available in the building, the location of the building, and the condition of the apartment. This test looks at the rent charge for a particular apartment and compares it to the rent for similar units in the building and in the neighborhood. To make that calculation, the city uses www.affordablehousing.com to compare other apartments in the database. The purpose of this test is to ensure that landlords are not raising rent to the maximum rent level under CityFHEPS, where the market rate for that apartment in that neighborhood would be lower.
A little bit more on rent reasonableness. It does not apply to rent regulated apartments, only to apartments on the open market. HRA applies the test at the time of initial application and anytime a rent increase is requested. If a rent increase is requested over 5%, I think there is, I'm trying to remember what the number in the HSTPA is. If a rent is more than 5%, the landlord has to give you like sufficient notice of an increase, and I think that would be a basis to suggest that it's not reasonable. Currently, the test is on hold for CityFHEPS move applications because HRA always needs to be trading its staff, but it is in use for rent increases. If HRA finds that a rent increase is not reasonable, the landlord can challenge the finding by using a form provided by HRA.
PHFL Section 610, that is Section 610 of the Private Housing Finance Law, was passed by New York State in December in 2022 to allow affordable housing developers to charge tenants who receive housing vouchers a rent that is higher than the legal rent, up to the maximum that the housing subsidy will pay. So, for example, if there's a household of 2 people in a rent-regulated apartment with a legal regulated rent of $2,250 and a preferential rent of $1,800, the landlord can charge the much higher rent of $2,969 for the apartment. The difference will be paid by HRA. The household share will not increase. They'll pay the same portion of the rent they were paying before, but CityHRA will be paying a higher rent than they were before. If the household loses CityFHEPS or any other housing subsidy, the landlord must reduce the rent to the previous legal regulated rent or preferential rent.
So if you or your clients or folks see sudden increases in the rent on a lease that doesn't make any sense, and you know that this person has a voucher, keep an eye out for 610. Landlords have not been very diligent and ethical in complying with all the program requirements. They're supposed to give notices and riders to explain how 610 works, specifically that if a person loses their voucher, that the rent reverts to what the prior legal or pref rent was. Yeah, it's new, it's slippery, it's worth keeping in mind. Okay, so we're going to talk about shares of the rent. How much does each household member pay toward the rent each month?
So when it comes to setting rent and the tenant's share of the rent, this is based on the household's income. And here's how HRA calculates household income. If it's employment income, the share is set at 30% of the gross income, and CityFHEPS pays the rest. Tenant pays their share to the landlord. But if the tenant only receives cash assistance, the shelter allowance is the share, which HRA sends directly to the landlord. If the household has a mix of people on cash assistance and people with earned income, the share is the greater of the shelter allowance or 30% of the gross income. If there is anyone in the household who is not in the cash assistance household, that is, a child with SSI or a roommate, that person pays 30% of their gross income. Shares are determined at each application and at each renewal.
So we can go through one quick example. So say we have a household of 5 people, all of whom have qualifying immigration status. The total income for that household, which comes entirely from employment income, is $4,200. And they live in a 3-bedroom apartment with a rent of $3,200 per month. This is pretty straightforward. If all the income is employment income, then you take that gross income number, $4,200, multiply it by 30%, and the household's share is $1,260. The CityFHEPS subsidy will pay the remainder, which is $1,940.
So now let's walk through how a CityFHEPS application is made. So with the CityFHEPS to stay application, there are some required documents. The CityFHEPS application is over a dozen different forms. There are about 4 forms that need to be signed by the head of household and about 3 that need to be submitted by the landlord, including with the CityFHEPS to stay. If the household is in arrears, you need proof of arrears, proof that the household is eligible, and that they will be able to stay in the apartment for at least 1 year after CityFHEPS begins.
So for CityFHEPS to stay application, of all CityFHEPS applications, there is an inspection. So after all of the tenants' forms and documents are submitted, there is a database to check for violations and other issues. This is known as the pre-clearance. If the apartment passes pre-clearance, there is then an in-person inspection to assess the condition of the apartment. If the apartment passes, the application is submitted to HRA for approval. If there are, dings that come up, the landlord will be given an opportunity to make repairs. And after that, the application will be submitted to HRA for approval. For applications that are submitted by legal services providers on behalf of clients in housing court, there is no inspection requirement. However, it is expected that the housing attorney representing this tenant and representing that they can remain in this apartment will ensure that repairs are made pursuant to the non-payment proceeding.
So CityFHEPS payments to the landlord. CityFHEPS can pay the rental arrears in cases where the tenant plans to stay in their current apartment. There's not a stated maximum amount of arrears that the CityFHEPS program is able to pay. However, if you are seeking more than $20,000 in arrears, HRA may ask that you obtain contributions from a charity to bring the total down. And those arrears are paid like a one-shot deal. The household may be recouped or responsible for paying back the amount depending on household income type. As with one-shot deals, the household can challenge payments amounts through a fair hearing and or negotiate a payback amount with HRA. There are no longer signing bonuses for landlords.
Okay. In a CityFHEPS to stay case, HRA, once it's approved, so you just got approved for CityFHEPS, HRA will pay the first month of the subsidy minus shelter allowance if the family's on cash assistance. If the family is not on cash assistance, it will pay the first full month of the subsidy. In move cases, HRA's initial payment to the landlord will be the first full month of rent and 3 months of the subsidy. And then going forward, if the household receives cash assistance, the landlord will receive 2 payments of shelter and the A and B checks and 1 subsidy payment for CityFHEPS before the first of the month. For a household that does not receive cash assistance, the CityFHEPS subsidy will be paid in 1 check before the first of the month.
Now, for CityFHEPS to move applications, they are similar to CityFHEPS to stay applications, except that the HRA will not be paying any arrears to the landlord who may have brought a non-payment case. The households in housing court using CityFHEPS to move are typically facing holdover cases in which the landlord seeks to terminate the tenancy for reasons other than the non-payment of rent. Households in shelter also use CityFHEPS to move, and their application process is managed by the housing specialist at their shelter. CityFHEPS to move applications can only be completed by HomeBase. Due to the long waits that we talked about before, it's best to refer a client ASAP. Once a household is receiving CityFHEPS, they are not able to move with the subsidy unless they get approval from HRA that there is a health or safety reason to move and are given a shopping letter and then return with an apartment to be processed. This is what a shopping letter looks like. This is used to apply for apartments, details the number of bedrooms and the maximum rent the voucher will pay for. After the household is approved for an apartment, home-based provider or housing specialist will arrange for the inspection, complete the application packet, and submit to HRA for approval.
All right. So CityFHEPS must be renewed annually, and modifications can be made on periodically, and the CityFHEPS can be restored if for some reason it needs to be restored because it wasn't timely renewed. So, all right, CityFHEPS recipients must renew their subsidy every year by filling out this form, CityFHEPS Renewal Request Form DSS 7E. Starting at the first renewal, as we discussed before, at the initial application, household income requirement must be under 200% of the federal poverty level. But at the first renewal, the household must maintain, or rather, the household income can be as high as 80% of the area median income, which in New York City, that's a much bigger range. So you can come in to CityFHEPS with a lower income, and as a household, you can earn more income and still be qualified to receive CityFHEPS, which is great. CityFHEPS regulations state that subject to funding, households will receive 4 renewals, and then starting in year 5, renewals are considered on a case-by-case basis.
So here's some more information on renewals. The renewal form is short and asks for an update on household composition, income, and rent. It does not ask for utility info. Many CityFHEPS recipients are now receiving the utility credit, which only started in November 2023. The renewal form asks about rent increases, but they are not always processed, even when documentation is provided. The renewal form and documentations can be submitted by AccessHRA, mailed, emailed, or delivered in person to the HRA Rental Assistance Program RAP unit at this email, or mailed to this address. So if you have a client that you've approved for CityFHEPS, it might be worthwhile to put a notification for next year to just check on them and see if they've properly done the renewal. I have had clients show up in housing court because they were on CityFHEPS, did not know that they should have renewed, and then the program stopped paying while they were still in the apartment. We were able to get them back on CityFHEPS, but still, that was a very stressful situation for them that could have been avoided.
Okay. So the deadline to renew the form is mailed to CityFHEPS household 5 months in advance of the end of their subsidy year. If the renewal is not sent in by the 60-day deadline, a second notice called a warning notice is sent, but not a new form, which seems silly. If the renewal form is not submitted 30 days prior to the end of the subsidy year, HRA will terminate the subsidy. A termination notice is sent to the household and to the landlord.
After 5 years, subject to funding, CityFHEPS can be renewed if the household is compliant with the rules, is otherwise eligible, and is 60 years or older, receiving or determined potentially eligible for federal disability benefits, or for good cause.
And I think our general experience is good cause exists. The rent is too damn high. There is not enough housing. So I don't think I have never seen someone be told, sorry, your time's up, no more CityFHEPS. But I mean, the times are changing, so who knows what happens now.
Yeah.
Modifications. Once the rent and share is set at the application or renewal, they are set for 1 full year. The rent cannot change in the middle of a lease year or a CityFHEPS year. Unless I guess the CityFHEPS renewal period and the rent stabilized lease are misaligned, or you're in a rent control apartment and pursuant to some state determination, the rent has gone up. In those instances, I'm sure HRA can amend the rent. If a household income decreases, the household share can be modified downwards using this form requesting a modification. However, a household is not required to report an increase in income to the CityFHEPS program in the middle of a CityFHEPS term year. This is different from people who are receiving, say, FHEPS, which is based on cash assistance. There, your recertification happens on a more frequent basis. So anyone who is receiving cash assistance must follow the rules of those programs about reporting their income.
Restorations. So subject to funding, if a household had received CityFHEPS in the past but lost it, such as by failing to renew, it can be restored within 1 year. If more than 1 year has gone by, the CityFHEPS can be restored for good cause. HRA is likely to approve to up to 2 years with a good explanation. Due to the Toliver class action, HRA is restoring CityFHEPS back to April 2020, if applicable.
There are a number of pending lawsuits that relate to CityFHEPS. One of them is called Toliver versus the City of New York. This is a lawsuit that was commenced in April of 2023 by the Legal Aid Society. We sued DSS in a class action lawsuit for failure to process CityFHEPS renewals in a timely and adequate manner, and for failure to timely and adequately process FHEPS restorations and modifications. There was a settlement that the parties entered into in December of 2024 that required many things, including training, and the city is way behind on their obligations underneath that settlement.
But because of Toliver, there have been a lot of changes that have happened with CityFHEPS. Families are given a receipt now when they file a CityFHEPS renewal form and documents, or at least they should be. Renewals should be processed prior to the end of the renewal period if it's filed 30 days prior to expiration. and no additional notices should be sent to that the tenant did not comply when they filed timely, except if additional information is needed.
Another exciting litigation is Vincent v. Andrews. So a little background on this is that the City Council in the summer of 2023 passed a series of laws that expanded the eligibility criteria for CityFHEPS. As we've discussed, you have to be at risk of eviction and you have to have shelter history or APS referral, and then certain armed services. It's very, very narrow. So if you are someone who is in a housing court case and you have arrears and you can't pay the rent going forward, but you don't have shelter history, you are currently not eligible for CityFHEPS, which sucks. So in February of 24, tenants sued Mayor Adams in a class action for refusing to implement this package of bills that the City Council had passed. Legal aid brought that lawsuit and the City Council joined soon afterward. And these are the package of local laws that the City Council had passed. Most importantly is that Local Law 101, which is expanding the eligibility of people at risk of eviction without the additional eligibility criteria. So the lawsuit was commenced, and in 2024, the Supreme Court judge granted the mayor's motion to dismiss the case. Legal Aid Society and City Council appealed. That appeal was argued in February of 2025, and we are awaiting the appellate court's decision. Our sense of the appeal is that it went very well for us, but we're all anxiously awaiting the court's decision.
So housing attorneys and advice. The housing court is assigning some cases to legal service lawyers on the first time tenants appear in housing court. Unfortunately, there are not enough housing lawyers for the post-pandemic need. Tenants can call 311 and ask to speak to someone for housing court advice. Tenants can call the Legal Aid Society at 212-577-3100 for housing advice. They will be routed to their borough's office. And tenants with questions about government benefits can contact Legal Aid Access to Benefits line at 888-663-6880. Again, all these numbers will be in the slides, which I believe are being shared with everyone here. Any questions? Maybe we should take a break before doing questions. We've been going straight through for 57 minutes now. What if the CityFHEPS voucher was issued in shelter? If someone is in shelter and receives a CityFHEPS voucher, that it will come with a shopping letter that they can take with them on apartment viewings to show the landlord or real estate agent or broker that they will be using CityFHEPS to pay the rent going forward.
Okay, why don't we start the break and we'll start again at 3:09.
Okay, so y'all at 3:09. Thank you.
So we have 87 people still online. We're happy to answer your questions. To save them for posterity, it's good to put them in the chat. Maybe we'll take turns, each of us answering these questions. So Labani Arturo asks, can tenants still use AccessHRA to complete the renewal application?
Yes, the renewal form and documentation can be submitted by AccessHRA, mailed, emailed, or delivered in person to the HRA Rental Assistance Program unit. You can refer to slide 53.
Charles, can you clarify what immigration status is eligible for CityFHEPS?
I believe, I'm not 100% sure. I believe it's permanent resident only.
No, well, no, there's been some expansion in recent years by the state. That may get changed with a new administration. And so people who have like asylees and refugees and all sorts of people with like a U visa, all sorts of category of people are if they're eligible for public benefits. They may not be for state public benefits like cash assistance. They would be eligible for CityFHEPS. And so that may change over time because the federal government is getting rid of people who have been here because of problems in their countries, right? So that's a changing thing. There's a great new updated chart on immigration status on the Empire Justice website. Legal Aid has helped work to update that. And it's a great chart who indicates who is eligible to get which government benefits, right? SNAP is not always eligible for everybody, depending on their immigration status, but a lot of times New York State is more generous on who can get safety net assistance. And if people are eligible for safety net assistance, state benefits, then they are likely eligible for CityFHEPS or FHEPS.
There is a broad category that is called PRUCAL, which is permanently residing under color of law. This is, under state law, OTDA can expand on the various criteria or various types of documentation that would make somebody be considered PRUCAL and eligible for state level benefits, including city level benefits. I'll take this question from Peter regarding a senior citizen on fixed income. So a senior citizen on SSI who's perhaps over income for cash assistance would qualify for CityFHEPS if they meet one of the other eligibility criteria, which is that they have shelter history or that they have APS services.
I see a question that says, can tenants still use AccessHRA to complete the renewal application? Yes. I also see a question, may a senior citizen on a fixed income apply? Yes, as long as they are otherwise eligible. Just being a senior citizen, unfortunately, does not make someone eligible for CityFHEPS. But if they're facing eviction or are receiving APS services, they could be eligible.
Or I had recently a senior citizen who was a veteran. So she got CityFHEPS. Or I have another senior citizen who's in a rent control department. So he'll get CityFHEPS. But you have to meet, senior citizen alone is not a qualification for getting CityFHEPS, nor is being disabled by itself. We would like it to be more expansive, but currently those are not the rules. And the rules for getting out of shelter are different than the rules we talked about today. So that's a whole nother training. So if you have a client in shelter, the veterans or a veteran would be eligible to get out of shelter. But there are people who are healthy, may have to work, and there's all sorts of different qualifications.
I see Giselle wanted to follow up on who to reach out for advocacy purpose with CityFHEPS. Would it be RAP Renewals?
So RAP Renewals at East 16th Street have a big waiting room down on the first floor. And then they have a smaller waiting room on the 10th floor where you have to be sent up because that waiting room only holds about 20 people. And there are actually workers who talk to people behind a glass partition. However, the CityFHEPS renewal, the CityFHEPS modification are really, really, really easy documents to fill out. So if you're attending this training and you have somebody who needs to fill one out, please help them fill it out. HomeBase is overwhelmed with clients. It's not worth getting on the waiting list for 6 months for HomeBase. We want them to help with the emergency cases up front. We want all of you to help people just fill out a really, really simple modification or renewal form. They're all on the internet. They're really easy to fill out. If you aren't comfortable with, or your client with AccessHRA, like Labani said, they can be emailed. You get a receipt. They can be faxed. They can be emailed or mailed or walked into East 16th Street. What we see is the ones that go on AccessHRA are less likely to fall through the cracks and will get processed faster because the work, the inputting work has already been done by your client. So it's better to fill it out on the platform than do it any other way if that's possible.
I saw a question from Fran Leopold. Can a homeless vet apply? Absolutely. If someone is homeless, and a veteran, they should apply for CityFHEPS. If anyone is living in a homeless shelter and they have immigration status, they should apply for CityFHEPS.
And unfortunately, there's no waiting time. There used to be a 90-day waiting time, but it often takes the shelter and DSS 90 days to say, hey, Susan's is a vet. She's eligible for CityFHEPS, but they don't do it very quickly. So unfortunately, there's a lag time. Some shelters have really good shelter advocates, housing advocates, and they will be pushing to help the residents in their shelter get it faster than the next shelter. But we do see lag time. The Coalition for the Homeless has the biggest intake in the city. They see 25 people one day and 50 the next. They have a huge intake, but there are people waiting outside in the street before 7 o'clock. So it's always better if advocates like you can help your clients do these really simple applications for modifications and renewals every year, just like helping people with DRE and SCREE. All things that you don't need to be a paralegal or a lawyer to do. Any advocate who's come to this training and reads the materials can do it. And we really need your help, because there are a lot of people getting CityFHEPS right now, and HomeBases are trying to deal with all the emergencies.
Orly asks how a tenant can complete a renewal or modification via AccessHRA. It is on the website and the app. I'm going to log into a client's previous, who I helped restore to CityFHEPS, and see like what like the actual button to press might be. I'll look into that.
And while you're doing that, Giselle has a question. There's no particular contact, though, for advocacy purposes. For example, if my client is paying more than 30% of their income, is there anyone who I can reach out to regard this? So many of the legal services offices have benefits practices. Some do housing related benefits like legal aid. So we have, on the end of our slides, we give information on our access to benefit helpline. They are open from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and the number is 888-663-6880, and it's in the slide deck.
Giselle, if your client is paying more than 30%, perhaps because their income went down, you could submit a modification. If they just got the renewal wrong, then probably smart to get advocacy assistance, but you can always submit a modification.
Good point. Good point.
Oh, Karima, your question is good. Your question is very good. And I'm sorry, this is a thing that we should probably stick in our slides, Susan. You can make a request for a reasonable accommodation, and your request for a reasonable accommodation can include a request for a bedroom count bigger than what your family size would get you automatically. So yes, you can submit a reasonable accommodation request for a larger unit size based on the need, and medical equipment is, or I mean, medical equipment, that's not what you're saying, but if a person requires their own space and they have a doctor's letter to support that, you can submit that request and get approved for a larger unit size.
So you would do that on the HRA website. Their constituents affairs unit deals with reasonable accommodation. So it could be, I had a client who's hearing impaired, so she got a reasonable accommodation to have somebody sign for her if she goes into a center. But similarly, that a request for an extra bedroom for FHEPS or CityFHEPS can be applied through constituents affairs. HRA has a group of people who meet quite regularly to go over these accommodation requests. But as Lavani said, it's really, really important. There must be medical documentation that the person needs their own bedroom. So medical equipment is one. Autistic person may need their own quiet space. We've had suicidal clients who need their own quiet space. So it depends. It's a case-by-case basis, and it's based on the medical evidence and also how many people are in the apartment. I had one case, in order to get, we had a family of 3, so they were entitled to a 3-bedroom. But because each person in the house had a disability, and we had a letter from 3 different doctors, the family was entitled to get a 3-bedroom apartment. But it's a case-by-case basis.
For clients in shelter, they can reach out to the Homeless Rights Project, their helpline, very experienced with navigating issues relating to shelter.
Or the Coalition for the Homeless. They also deal with CityFHEPS subsidy. So the city doesn't call it a voucher. A lot of people out on the street call it a voucher. City calls it a subsidy. Section 8 is known as a voucher. And I think the difference is because the city rules say they will give as many city vouchers as there's money. But Section 8, if there's money allotted, you're guaranteed that voucher, and it's a very valuable thing. And so any case in housing court where somebody has a Section 8 voucher or CityFHEPS or FHEPS, those are something that we're trying to make sure the judges understand those things should be fought for and coveted because the city's so expensive.
And I'm sorry, I'm having tech support issues. I can't log into HRA right now, AccessHRA right now.
Well, that's the problem. It's a very used app, but so people can do renewals online, and the city really recommends it because it saves them a lot. They don't have as many people as they did before the pandemic, and if people are able to use the app, that everything's already typed into the system, so it's less labor intensive for the city. So but it doesn't work always for disabled or older people who may not be comfortable with that. And some people, I have some clients who just really like to go to East 16th Street to make sure their papers are delivered by hand. They now have to give a receipt that something was given to HRA. But we are still seeing problems with delays on the renewals and modifications and people getting their utility, a little bit of money to help pay their utilities if their landlord has filled out a utility form. So we've attached the utility form. We want for 2025 to get more people getting utility funds because as well as the rents being very expensive, utilities are really high. So I have a client who's going to get $72.50 extra a month. So that'll help her pay her electric bill and her gas bill. Did we miss any other questions?
So I have a question from the live chat, if that's okay, on YouTube. Somebody asked, why is it that landlords don't want to accept CityFHEPS vouchers?
I'll answer that. So landlords rather get cash, right? If they get cash, if I say, okay, I work at Legal Aid, here's a check or here's a banker's check for $3,000 for the 1-bedroom apartment, they get it right up front. And unfortunately, dealing with government programs, there is a delay in the processing of the application. There's more paperwork and there's an inspection for a move-in. So the landlords rather have people paying cash. Now, usually when a landlord's taking cash instead of checks, he's probably not paying his taxes.
And then just a follow-up to that, why do families have to have shelter history in order to qualify for rental assistance? I mean, I don't know if you can answer that.
I can. The studies have shown, and the city has been working with professors from universities who study shelter system and study the pipeline into apartments that may not be rent regulated and then end up back in shelter, or they're not in good shape, which is why there are inspections. So people who have been in the shelter system are more likely to end up back in the shelter system. And so if there's a higher risk, the city wants to try to end that risk of homelessness for that household. So the best apartments to move into are apartments with rent regulation status so that people can stay as long as they can pay.
It's also worth saying we, legal aid and city council doesn't agree that the eligibility criteria should be so narrow. And it is obvious, beyond obvious, that preserving people who are currently in housing is cheaper and more economical and more humane and more obvious than forcing someone to cycle through city shelters in order to be qualified. So there might be some like historical kind of vestiges as to why it is the way it is, but we don't agree that that's correct.
Right. We didn't make up that rule. We don't agree with that rule. Thanks for for adding that in. But that's where the city's policies have come from. And we think a broader amount of people should be eligible for housing subsidies because New York City is so expensive. But on the other hand, New York City is the place where there are more jobs. So it's a better, it can be a great place to raise a family and get a job and contribute to the community. And what we've seen with the FHEPS program that's been going on since the days 1990s when we brought the lawsuit, Jiggets versus Dowling, families who have help paying the rent are more likely to not have to go into shelter, are more likely to be able to, their kids get a good education, mom and dad can get education and training, and so it stabilizes families and households. So it's a good thing for everybody. One of the handouts is a handout from HRA with questions and answers about who qualifies for FHEPS. So it's a good little summary, shorter than our slides. So it complements the slides. So if you want to give that to tenants who you're helping.
Sorry, I don't know if this question has been asked, but somebody wrote, or answered, how can one get advocacy assistance for renewal that has been miscalculated? I don't know if that was already answered.
I put the access to benefits line in the chat. Because it can be a very specific analysis. So probably the best would be to give some advocates a call who can walk through the papers. Right, Susan, there isn't I don't think there is like an easily accessible, publicly facing ombudsman that can
No,
manage
no.
HRA.
I mean, they do take
Yes.
walk-in clients at East 16th Street, but a lot of people cycle through there and they're very busy. So if it's a complicated question, our advocates are pretty good at that at legal aid. If it's routine, like they made a math error, you can walk into that center.
Okay, so just give everyone else a minute more to see if they have any more questions. And the slides will be, somebody asked, they will be on our website. So I'm going to post the link to our website on the chat. And that is also, we have the other trainings we do. We have some upcoming trainings, but we also have the FHEPS series training. So if you missed about learning about FHEPS, feel free to check that out. That's on there, also run by Legal Aid Society, and also about one-shot deals and everything. And I don't think we have any more questions. Okay, great. Thank you so much to the Legal Aid Society team. Thank you, Charles, Lovany, and thank you specifically Miss Bond, who's been here throughout all the 4 series. I think we did 4 or 5. And you guys can again reference those trainings on our website. This is, I think, the last of our FHEPS series, benefit series. But yeah, it has been very informative, and thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you to everyone here for everything you do for the city. Let's get more people CityFHEPS. It's a life-changing benefit that they're entitled to.
Thanks all.
Everyone have a good day.